And so the Bible speaks directly from the text. It's easy to hear. Through the Sundays of this summer season, you've been invited to join Doug and me week by week to explore thoughts about ways in which the message from Scripture, from the gospel, might be speaking through other voices in the culture if we pay attention, if we listen well. Artists and singers have been lifted up. We went back a good number of years to a couple of classic songs from the 60s by Bob Dylan, the Beatles. Doug invited us to be back in that Cheers pub to listen for the way the message they shared there might still inspire and speak, and then also to bemoan the tragic life of Kurt Cobain, who never quite seemed to get it. So today, last Sunday of the summer season, one more time, this time I'm going to invite us to listen for some storytellers from our lifetime, our days, and see what they might have to say. But let me start with this. Let me invite you into a scene which will be familiar to most. It's a scene I can still see in my mind's eye, although it goes back a couple of decades and more. Now it's bedtime, and we're taking time, as many a parent will. Doug, it's coming. Just wait. It's a joy. Adam and Meg are about to find out a couple of years out. It'll be there. Story time, right? We gather them in bed, and you begin with the little one scene stories, and then as they get a little older, you go to the chapter books, and the stories take a little longer to get to. You've got it. And one of the things that occurred to me, and because of the way I'm wired, I made my little guys try to share it with me, was to think about what these stories have to say, and really to ask them. I did ask them somewhere along the way, so guys, how many stories are there? Oh. Well, you could see their little minds go, and they were working it out, thinking about the ones we've read. And we decided, well, on the surface, many stories, a lot of stories. But I said, well, let's push it a little deeper. Let's think a little more about this. What do they all have in common? Well, those stories always have a main character. Some kind of a hero is going through episodes and adventures of many kinds. And most always there's some kind of an adversary putting obstacles in the way. They have to work it through. And sometimes it almost looks like they're not going to make it. But the best stories keep going until one way or another there's resolution, positive resolution. So how many stories are there, I would pose? And we kind of worked it through. Finally, maybe with a little help from their dad, they got it. The thought that, when you come right down to it, there's really only one story. It's the story of a person trying to become a real person, an authentic person, not hiding away without any of the trials and tribulations of life, but one who worked it through, figured out that there were skills and knowledge to be had, and finally there were decisions to be made about right and wrong, about light and darkness, about good and evil. There's really only one story, and the fact of the matter is, why, it's our story. We each get to work it through in our way, in our day, in our time. And a Labor Day Sunday is not a bad time to stop and to ask ourselves, so how am I doing on this journey? Am I working it through? What am I still working on? And whose guidance am I seeking? Well, the best tales encourage us to think about the journey and see ourselves in it. They come from the popular culture, and well, finally they can point us to the message of the most abiding story of all, the adventures of our ancestors. It's an ongoing saga, to say it plain. It's a never-ending story. A never-ending story. And just let me check the congregation today. Does that ring a bell with anybody? The never-ending story? Oh, good. I'm not alone in this. It was back in the 1980s, one of our favorite books, and then it became a movie. But I have to tell you, the other night, my oldest son, Luke, happened to be over, and we were clicking around the channels a little while his little guy was going to bed dares. And what do you know? But the movie The Never-Ending Story came on HBO. We watched it and we decided, oh my goodness, technology's come a long way. It was rather cheesy in its day, but we loved it. It was the best there was. And the story was basically an interesting rendition, because the background of it, if you know it, to remind you, was this. There was this mythical place called Fantasia, and something called the Nothing was eating away at it from the edges, was devolving this land into nothingness again. Chaos was moving in terrain, and the premise was that the only one who finally could make a difference was the little kid who was reading the story from the outside, and what he had to do was to call in a new name for the child empress. And if he was willing to do that, why, all could be restored. And of course, you know the ending. If you've never seen it, he finally gets it, and he does. Very imaginative. And a very imaginative suggestion that, you know what? Stories aren't just about somebody else. There are times when we need to do something, to add our part, to reach in, to do what we can to make a difference for the cause of right and good. The never-ending story is really our story. The message that carried there was that hope matters, hang on to it, that light triumphs, that in the end good prevails, God's way works, especially if we're willing to see ourselves as a part of it and add our voice and our deeds. And really, that message isn't made up. We know where it comes from. It's right there at the very beginning when God is working to bring something out of the nothingness, which otherwise would be the order of things. God said, let there be light, and then God said, let there be life, and then you remember the story. God brought some unique creatures onto the playing field and said, good, I need you to work with me on this. We got work to do to keep bringing my way to bear. King David recognized it. He called out about it in that piece from Chronicles we heard, praising God for God's overriding place in the scheme of things. Forever and forever, he said, God's wanting to be at work, and he recognized that he had a place in that work. And we're invited to recognize the same, that hope matters, that light triumphs, that the good will win. That God's way will be the way, after all, if we stay with it, if we work with God on it. Well, our boys began to recognize that. They recognized it when we came to one of the more classic tales of the last century, the Chronicles of Narnia, the lion, the witch, the wardrobe. 4 kids find their way through an old wardrobe in a musty house and pop out into a wintry land where they discover they're in a place called Narnia, but there's a problem there because an evil queen has cast a dark pale. It's forever winter. And they have a sense it might stay that way unless somebody does something, and they're not sure they can do it until another creature appears. What was that creature's name? The lion? Thank you, Aslan. That's the one I was thinking of. Aslan, the lion comes. And in the course of things, Aslan finds that the only way to try to make a difference is to sacrifice himself on behalf of one of the foolish children, and he does, and they figure that's it, they're doomed. The 2 girls are hiding in the woods in despair. They've seen it happen. The lion's been slain. And yet they're awakened that morning by the breath of some creature on their necks, and they wake up. There he is. Wait a minute. What's this? Isn't dead after all? Maybe not. We turn the page. And Aslan explains that it works like this, kids. Oh, the queen has some power. She has some dark power. Oh, yes, she does. And she has power from the beginning of time. But she did not know there was a deeper magic. All was a deeper magic from before the beginning of time. And it tells those who are aware of it that power isn't power completely. That there's a stronger power, the power of love, which will prevail over anything, the deeper magic. What a compelling thought. There's a deeper magic from before the beginning of time. What we see is not the final word. There's something else. There's something more. The recent film did a pretty good job of presenting that. On occasions when I've viewed it, I've wondered if those outside our tradition, when they watch that story, a pretty good allegory of our faith actually, when people from outside our tradition watch it, do they get it? Did they get the significance of this deeper magic from before the beginning? And the only one who could possibly know what was? The one who was there to see it happen. I had to chuckle. Vicki, I'm going to tell a story on your family. Last Tuesday night, just before the session meeting, there was a picnic, and so we're sitting around the table, happened to be sitting across from Vicki, and unbeknownst to her, I was going to be thinking about this. She somehow mentioned the fact that the time when her family went to see The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and her daughter Melinda, I think it was, when she asked, so did you get it, girls? She said, yeah, it's about God. And I said, well, thank you, Hamilton Square Sunday School. Where would you get that information to be able to make that connection? The messages are out there, folks. We want to make them. And by the way, for parents, yet again, good reason to make sure your kids get here to hear these things so they know what to do with it. And the message comes through that hope matters, that light will triumph, that good will prevail. God's way is the way after all. A simple message from the Bible story. In fact, it was really the summation of the whole story as shared by John there at the very end of the Revelation. He's coming along. Now, if you've never taken time to dabble much in Revelation, it may be because when you try, it's just a mystery. What do we do with all this wild imagery and this metaphorical kind of strange stuff? So let me just give you a clue, just in case. What I've concluded is the book of Revelation is very carefully written in a code so that outsiders can't really get it. But those who are on the inside get it. And it's trying to talk about, this deep metaphor about the struggle between light and darkness. It was written in a time, we think, the Roman Empire, when the emperors were dark lords. They were lording it over, and especially lording it over Christians and Jews who thought they had the right way. And the message was, hang on, keep hope, good will win, because you're on the team that knows about that deeper magic. And so, hear it again. John sees a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth are passing away. See, the voice says, the home of God is among mortals. God will be with them. They will be God's peoples. Behold, I'm making all things new. So be among those who hang in. The going will get tough, but hang in, hang on. Hope, let it prevail. Goodness will win. God's way is the way, after all. Well, I hope you have that in mind when you hear other stories from our day, like J.R.R. Tolkien. Some others made their way through all 3 volumes of The Lord of the Rings. No small thing. I mean, I did this with my kids. I look back and can't believe we made it. Of course, we skipped the elvish poetry. I mean, who can read that elvish poetry stuff? But basically, they got it, and got joyful when little Frodo and Sam, the improbable heroes of this huge tale, finally make their way up Mount Doom and throw in the ring of power, and the Dark Lord's power is broken. And I remember saying, guys, was it a sure thing that little hobbits like Sam and Frodo would be able to do? No, Dad, no, of course not. But maybe the message here is that, improbable things can happen through people who are just willing to work with the powers of light and goodness. Improbable things, but real things can happen. I remember the year was 1976. And I remember it around here because I was in seminary, and a few of us went over to, I think it was the Quaker Bridge Theaters, and we stood in line for over an hour to get our tickets to the hottest movie of the year. And so we finally got in and got to see Star Wars. And, there it was, the struggle between light and darkness full born. And you get to the end and you figure Darth Vader and the evil empire have got this one all wrapped up. The galaxy's going down the tubes, except for little Luke Skywalker and his little fighter jet. He's cruising in there, he's got one shot at it. And then over the sound system comes from the beyond Obi-Wan Kenobi's voice, "Luke, trust the Force. The Force will be with you always." Yikes. I remember going out and getting in the car to drive. We were so excited about that. Always. Did you hear that? Always. Where'd he get that? Well, he got it right from the end of the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus said, "I will be with you always." Wow. Well, we hope that message got through to others in the theater that night. Fast forward to the 1990s, and boy, the message came again through Harry Potter. Slogging our way through the Harry Potter books. I'm glad I did. I'm not sure I'd want to do it again, but, it was a good story, that tension, good and evil, light and dark. And there at the very end, tucked away at the very end, just before Harry Potter is going to have the last final encounter with the Dark Lord, the voice of his mother comes from the beyond and says, "I will be with you always." You can't make this stuff up. But George Lucas did a pretty good job with it, thank you. J.R.K. Rowling did a pretty good job with it. People all across the culture know these stories. I hope they make a connection. In what ways can we be Luke Skywalker? In what ways might we try to stand with Harry Potter as we make our way in that ongoing story of trials and tribulations, always remembering that hope prevails, light matters, good will win out in the never-ending story. Well, that's it, folks. That's all I got. The summer season ends right now, and we'll go on to other things starting next week. But not a bad thought for Labor Day Sunday. Let's keep working. Let's keep praying and keep laboring so that in the ongoing story of life, we're on the Lord's side. Amen.